He's still hungry. That's what the workers swore they heard when they opened the nursery. A woman's voice, low, steady, coming from somewhere inside a room that hadn't been touched since 1889. They said the sound was soft, too close to be an echo. Georgia, 1905. The rain had stopped, but the house was still dripping. When the doors of Rose Hill were forced open, the air that spilled out was warm, not rotten, not dusty, warm, and it smelled like milk. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with pale fingerprints pressed into the walls, small and perfect, as if a dozen children had touched the paint before it dried. At the end stood a door sealed with wooden planks in the shape of a cross. The nails were new, too new for a house abandoned 16 years. Something behind the door creaked, slow, even, like a cradle rocking. They pried away the boards. The air behind them sighed. Inside was a nursery. Curtains hung spotless. A cradle rocked, though there was no wind. On the floor, a bottle of milk half full, the wax seal unbroken. The surface rippled. The youngest worker leaned closer. A single bubble rose from the milk, then burst with a sound that did not belong in a silent room. A sigh, and the rocking started again. The house remained sealed until dusk. When the workers left, the nursery door was nailed shut again, and the key delivered to the county office. The men refused to stay after dark. That night, the local historical commission sent Eleanor Brooks, an archivist from Atlanta, to survey the property. She arrived before the storm had fully cleared, her lantern trembling in the wind. The house seemed smaller in the rain, but the smell reached her before she stepped inside. Sweet, faintly sour, unmistakable. Milk. She crossed the threshold slowly, boots leaving prints in the thin layer of dust the men had disturbed. The west wing was colder than the rest. Every sound, her breath, her steps, the creak of the lantern frame, fell into silence the moment it happened, as if the walls absorbed everything that dared to exist. The barricaded door waited at the end of the corridor. The planks were freshly nailed again, but through the seam between them drifted a thread of warm air, carrying that same scent. Eleanor hesitated, then pried one board loose. She didn't open the room completely, only enough for the lantern light to spill through the gap. The nursery was still, as they had described, the cradle in the center, the bottle beside it, and on the small desk, beneath the window, a folded letter tied with blue ribbon. She reached in and lifted it carefully with her gloved hand. The ribbon cracked like ice. The envelope was thick, the paper smooth. She held it closer to the light. The handwriting on the front was elegant, deliberate. Miss Lillian Fairchild, August 7th, 1889. From Clara Mayfield, Housemaid. The name made her pause. She'd seen it in the death registry that morning, buried August 9th, 1889, Rose Hill grounds. Eleanor opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, still crisp, still white. The first line read, "My dear Miss Lillian, the nights here grow longer, but the child grows stronger." The handwriting was soft and graceful, each stroke calm and careful, but the ink thickened toward the bottom of the page. "He sleeps now while I write. When he wakes, I will feed him again. The doctor says he will soon take less milk, but I think he hungers for more than the body allows. I have learned to warm the bottle twice, once for the flesh, once for the soul." Eleanor lowered the lantern. Her own reflection trembled in the bottle's glass. The letter continued, "If I do not leave the nursery before dawn, tell the master I stayed because he was still hungry." No closing. No signature, though the ink bled, where a hand must have lingered too long. Eleanor folded the letter back into its envelope, but the paper resisted, stiff, almost breathing. The faint scent of milk clung to it. From behind the wall, somewhere deep within the plaster, something knocked once, then twice, slow and hollow. Eleanor turned toward the sound. It came from the other side of the room, beneath the cradle, and just before the lantern flame wavered out, she heard it again. Wood against wood, moving gently in the dark, rocking. The road to Rose Hill shimmered beneath the August sun, a white thread winding through fields that smelled of iron and rain. Clara Mayfield arrived with a single trunk and a letter of recommendation folded into her apron. She had never seen a house so large, or so quiet. The air seemed to wait for her. The master of the house, Mr. Fairchild, met her at the entrance hall. He was tall, pale and polite, in the way men become when they have nothing left to say. His wife, Lillian, was upstairs, confined to her bed since the birth of their child, 2 weeks earlier. Clara curtsied, murmured her gratitude, and followed the head maid through halls that smelled faintly of lavender and lye. The nursery was at the end of the upper corridor, facing the orchard. Sunlight cut through lace curtains and landed on the cradle like a crown. The baby slept there small, motionless, perfect. "He hardly cries," said Mrs. Finch, the head maid. "He only stares. Don't let that trouble you. The doctor says he's a quiet one." Clara nodded. She had cared for infants before, though none so silent. When she leaned over the cradle, the baby opened his eyes. They were pale blue, unfocused, the color of milk. He blinked once, then closed them again. That evening, after supper, she carried a bottle upstairs. Lillian was asleep. The master had locked himself in the study. The house groaned with its own settling. In the nursery, the air was thick, heavy with heat. Clara sat by the cradle and began to feed the child. The milk vanished quickly, as if swallowed by the bottle itself. When she tilted it, nothing spilled. The baby's lips had never touched it. She blinked, then laughed softly at her own foolishness. She warmed another bottle and set it beside the cradle. The second emptied too. From the hallway came the faintest knock, followed by the slow turning of a key. Clara rose, startled, but when she opened the door, no one stood there. Only the corridor, lined with portraits of Fairchild ancestors, faces half swallowed by shadow. She shut the door again. That night, she couldn't sleep. The nursery walls creaked with the sound of something gently moving, a rhythm too, even for the wind. Rocking, always rocking. When dawn came, she found the cradle perfectly still, and the bottles full again, sealed as if untouched. Lillian called for her late that morning. "He doesn't cry, does he?" the mistress asked weakly. "He never has. The doctor says that's a blessing. But sometimes when I wake, I hear him breathing even though the room is empty." Clara smiled and said the baby was healthy. She didn't mention the bottles. That afternoon, while cleaning the nursery, she noticed a small crack beneath the cradle, a seam in the floorboards, barely wide enough for her finger. When she pressed it, a whisper of cool air rose through the gap, and beneath that, faint but certain, came the sound of water dripping, slow and steady, like the ticking of a clock no one had wound in years. By Clara's second week at Rose Hill, the air itself seemed to know her name. She had learned the rhythm of the household, the quiet meals taken without conversation, the master's nightly walks through the orchard, and the faint hum that drifted through the halls after midnight, a lullaby that no one claimed to sing. On a hot afternoon, Mrs. Finch called her into the scullery. The older woman's face was drawn, her sleeves rolled high, hands red from scrubbing. She set down a bucket and spoke without looking up. "There are rules in this house," she said. "You'll follow them if you want to keep your post." Clara nodded. "The nursery door stays locked after sundown. You'll deliver the last bottle before dusk and leave the lamp burning low. The key stays with the master. He'll check the room himself." Clara frowned. "The child wakes at night. He needs feeding." Mrs. Finch's gaze lifted then, sharp and weary. "He doesn't wake," she said. "Not anymore." That night, the air was thick enough to taste. Crickets stuttered in the fields, and thunder walked the horizon. Clara lay in her narrow bed, eyes on the ceiling, listening. Just after midnight, something soft brushed across the boards above her, a sound like footsteps, too light to belong to a grown person. She rose, dressed quietly, and stepped into the hall. The corridor was darker than she remembered. The portraits on the walls turned inward, their faces swallowed by shadow. The nursery door waited at the far end. The keyhole glowed faintly, catching the reflection of her candle. She reached for it. The latch clicked open before she touched it. Inside, the room was warm, almost fevered. The cradle rocked slowly, though no breeze stirred. The bottles on the shelf gleamed in the candlelight, their surfaces clouded by condensation. One of them trembled as she passed. She whispered the child's name, but no sound answered. The blanket in the cradle rose and fell with the rhythm of breath. Yet when she touched it, there was nothing beneath, only the hollow shape of where something had been. She backed away. The candlelight wavered. A droplet fell onto her wrist milk, thick and cool. It trailed down her skin before she could wipe it away. The air shifted, carrying a scent like iron beneath the sweetness. Then, from the rocking chair near the window, came a low creak. It moved once, twice, then stopped. In the faint glow, she saw a handprint on the armrest, small, wet, and fresh. The next morning, Clara told Mrs. Finch what she'd seen. The older woman stared past her toward the orchard. "You went in after dark?" "Yes." Mrs. Finch shook her head. "Then you fed him." "I didn't." "You did." The maid's voice was low, almost tender. "And now he knows you." That night, the master asked Clara to bring him the key. He didn't speak as he turned it over in his hand. "Obey the rules," he said finally. "The house remembers disobedience." He placed the key in his coat pocket and left the room. When Clara returned to her quarters, she found her door ajar. Inside, on the table beside her bed, lay the key. It was damp, and it smelled like milk. By the 5th week, Clara had stopped sleeping. The nights pressed close against the windows, and every sound seemed to belong to the house rather than to the world outside. The key lay on her nightstand, glinting faintly in the moonlight. No one ever asked for it back. She tried leaving it in the kitchen once, beneath a folded cloth, but each time she woke, it had returned to her bedside, warm to the touch, smelling faintly of milk and iron. She began keeping notes, scraps of paper hidden inside her apron. June 22nd bottles full again by morning. June 23rd door unlocked at midnight, though key in my hand. June 24th child breathing, though no one in cradle. She stopped writing after that. Every evening before dusk, she followed the rule. Light the lamp, leave the bottle. Yet each night, she dreamed of the door opening on its own, her feet moving down the hall, her hand on the cradle. She never remembered crossing the threshold, but she always woke with milk on her wrists, as if she'd been washing in it. The household began to change around her. The walls sweated in the heat, and the mirrors clouded with a film that no amount of polishing could clear. The master stayed away longer each day. Lillian's voice, once calling from upstairs, grew weaker until it became little more than a whisper behind the bedroom door. One afternoon, Clara found a note slid beneath her chamber door. It was written in the master's hand. "The doctor comes tomorrow. Do not enter the nursery tonight." That evening, thunder crawled over the fields. The orchard trees bent under the wind, branches tapping the windows like fingers asking to be let in. The key on her table rattled once, rolled to the floor, and stopped beside her bare feet. She picked it up. The metal was warm. When she reached the nursery, the door was already open, a finger's width. Inside, the air shimmered, as if the walls were breathing. The bottles on the shelf pulsed with faint light, their contents alive with movement, swirling like pale smoke. The cradle rocked slowly. She stepped closer. Something soft brushed her ankle. She looked down. The floor beneath the cradle had split a narrow line of shadow. From it rose a scent she could not mistake. Milk, sweet and thick, mixed with the copper tang of blood. Her hand trembled as she set the bottle down beside the cradle. The glass was slick with condensation, though the room was dry. The moment she turned away, a sound came, a small, wet gasp, like the first breath of something waking. The bottle's surface rippled once, then stilled. Clara backed to the door, her heart hammering. Before leaving, she glanced once more at the cradle. The blanket had shifted. Something underneath was moving. She shut the door and locked it. Her fingers shook so hard, the key scraped against the metal. When she looked down again, the key was gone. But when she returned to her room, it lay waiting on the table, beside a new bottle, filled to the brim. Morning came with the sound of rain against the shutters. The house smelled of damp linen and the faint sweetness that never seemed to fade. Clara stood before the mirror, combing her hair, trying to look less tired than she felt. But the woman in the reflection was not doing the same. Her hands moved slower, graceful, deliberate, almost tender. Her face was calm, eyes lowered in the way one looks at a sleeping child. Clara froze. The reflection continued to move for a heartbeat longer before stopping, as if realizing it had been seen. The mirror clouded then, its surface blooming with white mist, spreading from the edges inward like breath on glass. Clara wiped it with her sleeve. Her hand came away sticky. The cloth glistened faintly. It smelled like milk. She stepped back. The mist faded, leaving her reflection perfectly ordinary again. But behind her, in the mirror's depth, something small swayed back and forth. Back and forth. The cradle. She turned. Her room was empty. That afternoon, she found Mrs. Finch burning old linens in the courtyard. The older woman didn't look up when Clara approached. "Mrs. Finch," Clara said quietly, "has anyone ever seen things in the mirrors here?" Finch threw another bundle into the fire. "The lady doesn't keep mirrors upstairs anymore," she said. "Only the one in your room. The master had the rest taken down after the birth." "Why?" "Because she said the child was in them." The wind shifted. The flames hissed. That night, Clara refused to sleep. She sat at her small desk with the lamp turned low, watching the mirror. The reflection flickered with every gust of wind, shadows moving where there should be none. At midnight, she heard the first sound, soft, wet, rhythmic, a feeding noise. It was coming from behind her. She turned slowly. The nursery door, visible through the crack of her open door, stood ajar. Light spilled out a thin, golden thread across the hallway floor. The rocking had begun again, steady and patient. She rose, bare feet silent against the boards, and walked toward it. The light brightened as she drew near. The cradle rocked harder now, the bottles on the shelf trembling in time. When she stepped inside, the mirror above the dresser caught her reflection. She looked pale, frightened, but the figure in the mirror was smiling. In the cradle lay the child, eyes open, pale and glassy. His tiny hand gripped the blanket, and when she leaned closer, she saw his fingers twitch, not upward, but outward, as if reaching toward the glass. The reflection bent over him first. Clara stumbled backward. The room seemed to tilt, the air heavy and alive. She fled down the hallway, not stopping until she reached her own quarters. The mirror on her wall waited, still misted, and in its center, faint but certain, was a handprint small, pressed from the inside. The doctor arrived 2 days later, a thin man with silver spectacles and the weary air of someone who had seen too much. He came alone, his black carriage cutting through the wet red clay of the road. Clara watched from the upper window as he stepped down, adjusted his hat, and looked at the house the way a priest might look at a confessional. Mr. Fairchild met him at the door. Their voices carried faintly up the stairs, quiet, measured, never urgent. When the doctor finally entered the nursery, Clara stood aside, hands folded, eyes on the floor. The air inside was thick and humid. The doctor didn't flinch at the smell. He approached the cradle, leaned over it, and stayed very still. "How long has he been like this?" he asked at last. "Since the birth," the master replied. The doctor's hands hovered over the blanket. "He's cold," he murmured, "but not lifeless." Lillian stirred in her wheelchair near the window, her voice thin. "He never cries, not once." The doctor turned to Clara. "You're the caretaker?" "Yes, sir." He studied her face, then the bottle on the dresser. "And he feeds?" Clara hesitated. "The bottles are empty each morning." The doctor nodded, as though confirming something unspoken. "You keep the fire burning at night?" "Yes." "Good." He straightened, slipping his spectacles back into his pocket. "Keep it warm. That helps." He said nothing else. Later, as his carriage rolled away down the drive, Mrs. Finch found Clara standing by the door. "What did he say?" she asked. Clara's voice shook. "He said to keep it warm." That night, the temperature dropped. A storm crawled over the fields, rattling the shutters. Clara sat awake by the lamp, her reflection pale in the glass. The mirror across the room began to mist again. Not from breath this time, but from within. Shapes moved behind the fog. A woman bending, a cradle swaying, a hand reaching out of sight. She rose and stepped closer. The glass pulsed faintly, as though the wall behind it had a heartbeat. Then, just for a moment, she saw them, two figures, faint and transparent, standing where her reflection should be. One was herself, holding the bottle. The other, smaller, pale and silent, leaned against her shoulder. Their eyes met through the glass, and the child smiled. The mist vanished. The mirror showed only Clara again alone, trembling, the bottle in her hand half full of milk that hadn't been there a moment before. For 3 nights the rain did not stop. The air inside Rose Hill grew heavy and wet, clinging to the skin like breath. The smell of milk deepened, souring at the edges, sweet in the center. Clara could not rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the sound steady, pulsing, a slow heartbeat that seemed to come from beneath the floor. By the 4th night, she could no longer ignore it. She lit her lamp and followed the sound through the hall and into the nursery. The air there was warmer than anywhere else in the house. The cradle swayed softly, though her footsteps made no breeze. She knelt beside it. The floorboards were uneven, a narrow crack widening between them near the rocker's edge. When she pressed her palm against the seam, the wood gave slightly, breathing in and out beneath her touch. There was space below. She fetched a poker from the hearth and pried the boards apart. The smell rose immediately, milk and earth, warm metal and candle wax. She lowered the lamp and saw the black mouth of a stairwell leading down. The steps were narrow, carved crudely into the dirt. She descended, one hand on the wall, the other holding the flickering light. The air grew cooler, then warmer again, like walking through the lungs of something alive. At the bottom lay a small room built from stone. The walls glistened with moisture, and dozens of glass bottles stood arranged neatly along the shelf. Some empty, some filled with a pale liquid that pulsed faintly in the flame. In the center of the room stood a wooden cradle, identical to the one above, only older. Its wood was black with age, and something inside moved with each of her breaths. Clara stepped closer. The blanket inside was white, unstained, folded with care. Beneath it she saw a shape, a small body, perfectly still. Her lamp trembled. She reached out, fingers brushing the edge of the blanket. The fabric was damp. She drew it back. There was no child, only a hollow, shallow impression in the bedding, as though something had once lain there and vanished. The bottles on the shelf began to rattle, softly at first, then faster, the sound building like teeth chattering. Milk splashed inside them, though no hand touched them. She turned to run, but the stairwell had gone black. The light from her lamp thinned, curling like smoke toward the ceiling. Then, from the cradle behind her, came the softest sound, wet, gurgling, almost content. A feeding noise. The blanket began to rise and fall with the rhythm of breath, and as she backed toward the stairs, the reflection of her lamp glinted against the bottles. For an instant, she saw her own face mirrored across a dozen curved surfaces, each one smiling, each one bending low over an unseen child. She stumbled up the steps, heart pounding. The nursery door slammed shut behind her before she reached it. When she turned, the floorboards had closed again. No sign of the hole, no trace of earth, only the cradle, still rocking. The next morning, the rain stopped as if someone had closed a door in the sky. The house was quieter than it had ever been. Even the air felt thinner, emptied of something unseen. Clara had not slept. She moved through the halls like a ghost herself, waiting for someone to speak, for anyone to acknowledge what she had found beneath the floor. But no one did. The master had gone to town again. The servants kept their eyes down. Only Mrs. Lillian Fairchild, pale and wrapped in her shawl, asked to see her. The mistress sat by the window of her dim bedroom. The light that fell across her face seemed to belong to another century. Clara curtsied, hands folded tight to keep them from shaking. "You've heard him, haven't you?" the lady said softly. Clara hesitated. "He cries sometimes." Lillian smiled faintly. "No, he doesn't cry. He never did." The wind stirred the curtains. Lillian's gaze moved toward the corner of the room, where a small cradle, an older one, had been draped with white cloth. "I wasn't meant to have children," she whispered. "I was told my body would fail me. And it did, again and again. Then last winter, I prayed for mercy. I said I would give anything if I could just hold a child that lived." Her voice trembled. "That night, the storm came early. The doctor was too far to reach. Only my husband and the housemaid were here. He fetched her when I began to bleed. She was kind, clever, calm. She said she had helped deliver a child before. I believed her." Clara's breath caught. "Clara?" "Yes," Lillian said. You don't remember," Lillian said gently. You wouldn't. The fever took you. You died 2 days after he was born. We buried you under the tree behind the orchard. And yet, somehow, you stayed. Clara stepped back, shaking her head. I'm alive. I've been here for weeks. Yes, the lady whispered, and so has he. The air in the room grew colder. The curtains stopped moving. I told my husband to seal the nursery after the milk soured, Lillian said. He did it himself, hammer by hammer. He said if the house was fed, it would let us live. And it did. For a while, she turned toward the cradle in the corner, her voice breaking. I stopped visiting him when he began to look like you. Clara could not speak. The world tilted around her. Every sound pressed thin. Then came a knock, slow, deliberate, 3 times upon the wall behind the bed. The wallpaper rippled with each sound, soft as breath beneath skin. Lillian closed her eyes. He knows we're talking. From somewhere deep in the floor came a faint cry. Neither child nor wind, rising and falling in rhythm with the sound of the house breathing. Clara backed toward the door. The lady did not stop her. Before you go, Lillian said, remember this. He doesn't need much, just warmth, and someone to stay with him when he wakes. When Clara reached the hall, she realized her palms were wet. She looked down. Milk. The storm returned without warning. Lightning split the fields, and thunder rolled across the orchard, like the sound of the earth cracking open. The servants fled to the lower hall, whispering prayers. Upstairs, Clara sat alone in her room, staring at the key that had appeared on her table once more clean, gleaming, still wet with milk. She didn't remember bringing it there. She never did. The house groaned under the wind. Floorboards shifted like ribs. From the hallway came the soft sound of a door unlatching, slow, deliberate, 1 click at a time. She rose, the lamp trembling in her hand. The key turned hot against her palm, then cooled, as if guiding her forward. The corridor was darker than she had ever seen it. The portraits had vanished into shadow, their frames empty. Only the far door remained visible, the nursery. It stood open. Inside, the air shimmered, thick as breath. The curtains lifted in waves, though the windows were shut. The cradle swayed in the center of the room, its motion calm, patient, knowing. She stepped closer. The bottles on the shelf glowed faintly in the lightning, their contents rippling as if stirred from below. A figure stood near the window. It was her, not her reflection, not light or glass, but her, dressed in the same gown, the same braid, her hands folded as if in prayer. The twin raised its head and smiled. Clara, it said, in her own voice. He's waiting. The cradle rocked harder. The blanket fell away. Beneath it, the bedding sank inward, breathing, rising, falling. The other Clara moved to the cradle and lifted the bottle. Her fingers left smears of milk across the glass. She hummed softly, the same lullaby Lillian once mentioned. The sound filled the room like smoke. Clara wanted to speak, to ask what this thing was, but her mouth would not open. Her throat ached with the taste of sweetness and iron. The figure turned toward her, eyes pale as skimmed cream. You fed him first, she whispered. You'll feed him again. Lightning flashed. For a heartbeat, the room doubled, the two of them standing side by side, one flesh and one reflection, and between them, the cradle, empty now, the blanket stirring as if touched by invisible hands. Then came the cry. Soft, hoarse, not from the cradle but from the walls themselves, like breath being pulled through plaster. The bottles shattered one by one, milk spilling across the floorboards, steaming in the cold air. Clara ran for the door. The key in her hand turned red hot, searing her palm, but she didn't drop it. She threw herself into the hall and slammed the door behind her. The house fell silent. When she looked down, the key had melted slightly, warped into the shape of a small curled hand. She pressed it against the wall, shaking, and whispered, "You're not real." From inside the nursery, the other Clara's voice answered, perfectly calm. "Then who's holding the lamp?" Clara looked down. Her hands were empty. The lamp was still burning inside the room. By morning, the storm was gone. But the sky stayed the color of lead. The orchard glistened with rainwater, and the ground was soft enough to remember every footprint. Clara walked without her apron, her hair loose, her shoes sinking into the mud. She didn't know why she'd come outside, only that the air felt thinner there, and the silence less cruel. The trees leaned under the weight of fruit not yet ripe. Beneath them, puddles reflected the house, its dark windows, its stillness. From this distance, Rose Hill looked almost peaceful. Almost. She reached the edge of the orchard where the grass ended, and the soil began to slope down toward the creek. That was when she saw it, a square of earth darker than the rest, where the grass refused to grow. The rain had washed away part of the surface, revealing the edge of old planks below. A grave. The headboard was nothing more than a flat stone, half sunk, with faint letters etched by hand. Clara Mayfield, August 9, 1889. She sank to her knees. Her hands trembled over the soil, but she didn't touch it. The wood beneath looked damp, pliant, as though it had never fully dried. The air around her thickened, carrying that familiar sweetness, milk and iron. A breeze rose from the creek, but it wasn't cold. It was warm, like breath from the ground itself. And then, faint but certain, came a sound. It wasn't wind. It wasn't water. It was a baby's sigh. Clara staggered back, clutching her chest. The sound grew clearer, rhythmic, a slow inhalation that seemed to pull the mist toward the grave. The soil began to darken again, one patch at a time, as if absorbing something unseen. Behind her, the house groaned, old wood, tightening, nails creaking. She turned. The nursery window was open. The curtain moved once, then stilled. Clara looked down again. A single bubble of white rose from the wet soil and burst, releasing a thin trail of steam that carried the smell of milk. She wanted to scream, but her throat refused. Instead, she whispered to no one. "I'm alive," the wind answered, not in words, but in rhythm. The same soft rocking sound she'd heard every night, now echoing beneath her feet. The grave breathed, and with each rise of the earth, the ground pressed upward, slowly, insistently, until the soil cracked and something pale pushed through. A corner of fabric, soaked but intact. It was the edge of her own apron. She turned and ran, her breath tearing at her ribs, her heartbeat sinking with the sound beneath the ground. When she reached the porch, she looked back once more. The grave had smoothed itself over. Not a trace of disturbance remained, only the faint smell of milk carried on the morning air. The house was quiet again, but not empty. Every board seemed to breathe beneath her feet. Every doorframe pulsed faintly with warmth. Clara moved like a trespasser through her own life, one hand trailing along the wallpaper as though touching the inside of someone's body. She couldn't stay still. After what she'd seen in the orchard, stillness felt like permission. The master's study was locked, as it always was, but locks at Rose Hill had stopped meaning anything. The key on her bedside table, her key fit perfectly into the door. The room smelled of tobacco and old paper. Dust floated in the thin light, spilling through the curtains. On the desk lay a single black ledger, bound in cracked leather. The spine had worn smooth, where a hand had touched it too many times. She opened it. The first pages were ordinary. Inventories, shipments, expenses. Then the handwriting changed. The numbers gave way to names, columns of them, each followed by a single word. Evelyn H., August 1872, failed. Anne P., May 1876, incomplete. Martha K., November 1882, sustained, brief. Each line was dated and signed by Thomas Fairchild. She turned the page. The later entries were written in a heavier hand. The ink had bled through the paper, the letters uneven. Mary Finch, February 1888, replacement unsuccessful. Clara Mayfield, August 1889, successful. Her breath caught. There were more words beside her name, scrawled hastily in the margin. Child alive. House satisfied. The next page was blank except for one new line written in a thinner, unfamiliar script. Payment ongoing. Clara's hands trembled. She shut the ledger, but the air in the room seemed to tighten, pulling inward. The curtains shifted, though no wind came. Behind her, the study door clicked shut. She turned. The master stood in the doorway, his coat soaked from the rain. His face was calm, almost kind. "You weren't meant to see that," he said. "What is it?" Clara's voice broke. What does it mean? He sighed and crossed to the desk. This house was never built to stand on soil alone. It was built on promise. Every generation must feed it, or it forgets our name, your kindness, your care. It gave it shape again. The house remembers gratitude. Clara stepped back. You fed it, people. I gave it what it asked for, he said softly. Warmth, breath, a mother's voice. You gave it those things too. And look how it loves you. It let you return. Return? You died here, Clara. But the house kept the part it needed. The ledger on the desk fluttered open by itself, the last page filling slowly with fresh ink, letters appearing as though written by an invisible hand. Clara's name darkened, underlined twice. The master watched it, his expression unreadable. It's almost finished, he whispered. Once it's fed again, it will sleep another generation. Clara backed toward the door, but the handle burned under her hand. Don't fight it, he said gently. It's mercy to be remembered. The window glass behind him trembled. For a moment, Clara thought she saw the reflection of herself standing there, holding a cradle instead of a lamp. Then the ink on the page bled through, dripping from the desk to the floor, forming small white drops that steamed where they landed. They smelled like milk. The rain stopped by evening, leaving the world slick and heavy. The orchard steamed. The air inside Rose Hill felt alive, like lungs after a long breath. Clara knew then that the house was not sleeping anymore. It was awake, listening. She carried the lamp through the halls with both hands. The flame bent toward the walls, drawn by some invisible current. Every portrait she passed had changed. The faces that once looked away now faced her, their eyes pale and wide, like milk clouding glass. The nursery door stood open. Inside, the air shimmered with heat that didn't belong. The cradle moved slightly, as if rocked by something unseen. On the desk, the bottles refilled, one by one, the liquid glowing faintly, thick as cream. Clara set the lamp on the floor. Her heart beat too loud in her ears. She thought of the ledger, the graves, the mirror, the lullaby she didn't remember learning. She thought of the way the master had said, "It let you return." "I'm not staying," she whispered. She took the lamp and swung it hard against the cradle. Glass shattered, flame leapt to the blanket, then to the curtains. The air caught fire. The house groaned a deep, low sound that shook the floorboards. The milk bottles burst one after another, spraying white arcs through the smoke. The scent filled her lungs, sweet, burning, suffocating. The door slammed shut behind her. Heat clawed at her back. She tried to turn the key, but the metal seared her palm. From within the smoke came the faintest voice. A child's voice, steady, almost calm. "Don't leave me." The fire reached the ceiling. The plaster began to melt. Milk and ash dripped together, coating her arms in a grey sheen. Through the flames, she saw it again, the mirror on the far wall, unburned. In it stood another version of herself, calm, untouched. The child in her arms, breathing softly. The reflection rocked the baby gently and looked up at her. "Feed him," it said. "He'll stay quiet if you feed him." Clara screamed and threw the lamp into the glass. It exploded into a burst of white light, but instead of shattering, the mirror rippled like water, and from its surface, a single small hand reached out. The fire roared, the heat twisting the air. The hand gripped her wrist, soft, cold, impossibly real. She pulled back, but it held tight, drawing her closer to the glowing surface. For one brief moment, she saw the nursery as it had once been, clean, bright, filled with sunlight. A woman hummed softly as a child slept in her arms. The woman looked up, and Clara realized she was looking into her own eyes. Then the image vanished. The ceiling collapsed. The fire swallowed the cradle whole. Clara fell backward, choking on smoke and milk and air. She crawled toward the door, reached for the handle, cold again now, and the moment her hand touched it, the sound stopped. No crackle of fire, no crying, no wind, only silence. And in that silence, the faint rhythm returned, rocking, back and forth, back and forth. The fire had been forgotten. That was what the report said. Accidental, electrical, total loss. The house had collapsed inward, sometime in the 1,890 seconds, long before anyone alive could remember the names carved into its gate. But in 1905, the state sent Eleanor Brooks back to finish the cataloguing of what remained. She arrived at Rose Hill just after dawn. The orchard was gone, nothing but stumps and ash. The house itself stood like a skeleton of brick and charred beams. The roof had fallen, leaving only the central staircase intact, rising toward nothing. Eleanor moved through the ruins slowly, the smell of smoke still faint in the air after all those years. Her boots crunched over blackened glass. What struck her most was how clean it was. No vines, no insects, no birds. As if the place still breathed, waiting. The nursery had survived. Or part of it. The walls were scorched but standing, the window glass fused into rippled sheets. In the center of the room sat a single object that hadn't burned, the mirror. Its surface was intact, the frame untouched. Ash and soot had gathered around it in a perfect circle, as if the fire had gone out before reaching it. On the floor nearby lay a rusted cradle hinge, twisted into the shape of a hand. Eleanor crouched beside the mirror and brushed away the ash. Her fingertips came away faintly white. It wasn't soot, it was powder, like dried milk. She opened her satchel and took out a notebook. As she wrote, her pencil stuttered against the page. The ground beneath her seemed to pulse, a soft vibration that rose through the floorboards. She steadied herself and leaned closer to the glass. The reflection wavered slightly, not from light, but from movement within. Shapes shifted behind the surface shadows that didn't belong to her. Then she saw the letter. It was lying flat against the mirrors inside, pressed against the glass from beneath the surface. The blue ribbon still bright, unburned. Eleanor reached out. Her fingertips met the glass. It was cool, then warm. The writing on the letter had changed. The date was gone. The ink was darker, the hand less steady. She could make out only a few words. He sleeps. He still drinks. Do not let him forget. Eleanor stepped back, her breath clouding the mirror. The letters disappeared behind the fog. She turned to leave, but something shifted in the reflection. The room behind her in the glass was not a ruin, it was whole. The cradle was standing. The bottles gleamed on the shelf, and someone was sitting in the rocking chair, humming softly. A woman. Her hair was pinned the old way, her apron white and neat. In her arms, something small moved beneath a blanket. The reflection of Eleanor watched her own face in the glass and saw the woman look up. Clara Mayfield smiled. The mirror rippled once, like water disturbed. Eleanor's lantern went out. In the silence that followed, the faint sound returned the slow, patient rhythm that no time could erase. Rocking, back and forth, back and forth. Eleanor left the nursery as the sun began to rise. The light spilled through the ruined windows, turning the ash in the air into glittering dust. For a moment, it looked as though the house itself was breathing out the century it had held inside. She walked through the hall, past the rooms where ceilings had collapsed and stairways ended in open air. Her boots left prints in the soot that disappeared the moment she turned away. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, not even the wind. When she reached the entrance hall, she paused. The mirror behind her gave a soft, brittle sound, like a sigh pressed through glass. She turned. Through the haze of morning light, she could still see it standing perfectly clean amid ruin, as though protected by the same unseen warmth that had once filled the nursery. The reflection was no longer hers. In the mirror, the house was whole again. The curtains hung white and new. A cradle rocked in rhythm with a heartbeat that did not belong to this hour. A woman sat beside it, humming softly. Her hair was tied in a simple braid. Her face was calm, eyes lowered, a faint smile touching her lips. Clara Mayfield. The image looked alive, not memory, not ghost. Alive, and in her arms, something small stirred. Eleanor took one cautious step toward the mirror. The warmth she felt was real, pressing against her skin like sunlight. The closer she leaned, the louder she could hear it. The lullaby, the soft hum of breath, the creak of wood. She whispered, "Clara?" The woman in the glass didn't answer. She only rocked the child and lifted her eyes. For an instant, Eleanor thought she was looking directly at her. But then she realized Clara was staring past her, at something over her shoulder. Eleanor turned. The nursery behind her was empty, only broken glass and beams. Yet the air was warm again, faintly sweet. On the blackened floorboards near her feet, A small puddle spread slowly outward, pale and opaque. Milk. She backed away toward the doorway, but the reflection followed, moving closer as if walking through another world. The lullaby grew softer, until it was almost the sound of breathing. Then the mirror rippled once more. The woman and the cradle faded, replaced by a reflection that was neither ruin nor whole. A corridor that stretched into shadow, lined with doors. At the end of it, faint light pulsed in time with a heartbeat. The house had learned to remember. It didn't need walls. It only needed someone to listen. Eleanor turned and fled into the daylight, leaving the ruins behind. The wind moved through the orchard field, carrying the faint scent of milk and something warmer, almost human. And when she looked back one last time, she saw it. In the empty frame of the nursery window, a figure watching, a woman holding a child, rocking in perfect silence. Back and forth,